This conference will now be recorded.
All right, item number 1 on the agenda, consider approval of the consent agenda items.
Madam Mayor, I move to approve the agenda items or the consent agenda items as presented.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call roll?
Adams,
Yes.
Bishop,
Yes.
Malott,
Yes.
Shriver.
Yes. Item number 2, requests or comments from the public. There being none, we'll move on to item number 3, consider 2021 financial statement and report of the city's independent certified public accountants.
We have with us tonight Sean Gordon with Gordon CPA. We did send you a copy of the document ahead of time. I think maybe you got the printed copies. With that, I'll let Mr. Gordon kind of hit the highlights, and if there are other questions, we'll both be here to answer.
Okay, thank you, Mike. As Mike said, my name is Sean Gordon with Gordon CPA. We performed the 2021 audit of the city. So I'll go through that bound copy, kind of explain what you're looking at section by section. So starting with pages 1 and 2, this is called the Independent Auditors Report. This format is a little bit different than what you've seen over the past few years. There was a change required by the state for this year. It kind of just reorganized things and it moved the most important paragraph to the top section. And that is the opinion paragraph. So the third paragraph down there on page 1 is called the Unmodified Opinion on Regulatory Basis of Accounting. That's just a wordy way of saying that the highest and cleanest opinion we're allowed to give the city for 12/31/21 fiscal year, we did give the city for that fiscal year. So it reflects very well on the overall financial and internal control management of the city for that time period. Further on down in this section, we discuss the council and management's responsibilities for these financial statements, and then our responsibilities as well. Flipping forward to page 3, this is called the Summary Statement of Receipts, Expenditures, and Unencumbered Cash. Here you'll see in the left-hand column all of the funds of the city, and then beginning cash, receipts, expenditures, and then ending cash. You'll see at the very bottom of that right-hand column the total cash the city had on hand at 12/31/21, which is the $6.56 million number there at the bottom of that. Overall, we do a couple ratio analysis on cash balances, and overall the city's cash balances meet requirements and recommendations by a number of different entities and organizations. So again, reflects very well on how healthy the city's cash balances are at the end of 2021. Next section forward is pages 4 through 9. These are the notes to the financial statements. Here we discuss many things, including the city's accounting policies, information on long-term debt, CAPERS and KP&F retirement program, capital project items. As I said, this contains quite a bit of information, a very good read for later on. This section is mostly the same as what you've seen over the past few years. There were no changes required by the state in this section. Page 8 is information on the city's debt. There you'll see in that debt table on page 8, total debt of the city, that's at the top of page 8, total debt of the city at year end 12/31/21. Yes, sir.
So
Yes, sir.
I don't know if y'all's missing page 8 and 9 in the back.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
It may just be mine. Do y'all have
Okay.
it?
I've got it.
Okay.
Okay. I just see mine. Okay, I know what it is, but thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, so that
This
reflects,
might not.
right, that reflects long-term debt there on those pages. And then flipping forward, the next section forward, the final section forward is pages 10 through 34. And these are just more detailed breakouts of the funds that were on page 3. So here you'll see a comparison to the budget that was adopted for 2021 for those funds. And on flipping back to page 10, you'll see a comparison for each fund that had a budget. And you'll see in that right-hand column that each fund of the city was under the budget authority for 12/31/21 as well. So again, reflects very well on the budget management of the city for that time period. And then there was a separate communication that we had sent that may have been in your agenda packet. It had 3 auditor recommendations on it. If you have any questions on those, please let me know. But we will check up on those recommendations and responses of the city when we do the audit next year. So if you have any questions on any of that, please let me know.
That was, I sent that to you by separate cover letter with basically management's response to the comments.
Okay. And could you just for the public, since there are a lot of folks here that aren't privy to that,
Yes.
just touch on those notes briefly?
Yeah, so we had 3 auditor recommendations. One of them was we had noted that there was a check that was handwritten and signed by one signer, which is against, which is opposite of the city's policy regarding cash disbursements. So that was item number 1. The second item had to do with credit card purchases. There was supporting documentation missed that we were not able to view on a few purchases. There was sales tax paid on a few items. And then there were 2 items that didn't follow the city's policy regarding obtaining quotes. And so that was the second recommendation. And then the third recommendation was on fuel purchases made with the city's WEX fuel credit card. We were not able to review some of the invoices and receipts for those purchases as well. So those were the 3 recommendations that we had.
And do you have more in your presentation?
I do not.
Okay, I had a couple of questions.
Yes, ma'am.
And this might be Mr. Webb question,
Yes.
it might be for you. In a note from Mr. Webb, we had great news that our revenues were substantially over budget, 783,589, and our expenses were under budget, which is 683,108, which is, I mean, about all you can ask for. That's great news. I was just wondering if that's reflected in this report or where we see where that money goes, because it's a pretty substantial swing in
Yeah,
to
so
be able to do a lot
for the
with that.
budgeted expenditures, if you refer to page 10, it will show in the right-hand column, probably that dollar amount that Mr. Webb had spoken about on the expenditure side. For the revenue side, you'll have to go through each fund page that starts on page 11 to get that total.
I think predominantly what we're talking about, mainly focus on general fund, is if you look at page 11,
Mhm.
those 2 numbers. So you can see the actual versus budget and then see, whether we came in over or under. So for example, ad valorem taxes, we actually came in under budget by almost 77,000, but our retail sales, which we've been reporting all year, was around 330,000 over what we budgeted. And so if you went down and added all those up, you see where the bottom line is to the 780. Mainly it was in the area of sales taxes. Gaming revenues was fairly significantly above what we budgeted. Those are probably the 2 big items in there.
And those overages in the revenue, those just stay in those specific
Stays in
funds.
the general fund.
That'll roll over.
So effectively, the general fund revenues less the general fund expenditures at the end of the day goes into the general fund cash balance, which if you look at the bottom of the page, our unencumbered cash balance was at 876,403, which again is still a good number. And some of the ratios I used in my cover letter to you, when I looked at that number, I looked at actual expenditures. Our policy is actually to budgeted expenditures, and how you do these ratios can vary a little bit. So I used what was probably the easiest for people to see, which is if I went down there and said, okay, we spent $6,991,730 and divided that into 876,403, you got that 12.5 or 6, whatever, 8%. There are some pieces that are in both the budget areas related to lease purchases that kind of go in and go out, and it may impact it. I think really the point I wanted to make there from a cautionary tale is we expected we were going to spend down our cash balance. We know we were coming out of, the whole pandemic and thing. I would say we did much better than probably many, many organizations. The caution is we just as we always are during the budget time, we're very cognizant of that number. And generally over the last few years, that number has stayed pretty steady or grown a little bit. Again, it's not one where I think the auditor or I think that that number is horrible and it sends, should send big red flags, but it's enough that, we don't really want to see that. You want to maintain that cash balance. That's our rainy day fund. But we also used it the way rainy day funds were set up, which was nobody expected a pandemic that was going to last 2 years.
Right. And I think the
Exactly why you have it,
overall,
yeah.
the
The
overall
overall
from it is
picture.
a really good and healthy overview of it.
Mhm.
I had one other, it had come up from some community members, and I think it's just good to clarify anyway. When we're talking about state standards, and we have that in different areas of the city where we have to meet certain requirements by state standard.
Mhm.
That's what this audit is basically doing. Is that
That's
correct?
part of what we're doing. Yeah, we're checking numerous statutes to make sure the city's meeting those responsibilities and those requirements.
Okay.
But overall, what we're doing here is we're making sure that these numbers are accurate
Okay.
and they're materially accurate. That's again another one of the things that we do. We also check internal controls to make sure that they're causing cash or receipts or expenditures to be materially accurate as well. So
Okay.
that there's a number of things that we're doing, but yeah, among those three things is what we're doing.
And then, so it wouldn't be the type of audit that's making sure we're spending the money in, responsibly or as effective as possible, or those sort of policies. It's just to make sure that the numbers are accurate in what we're reporting.
Correct.
and
Yeah,
reporting.
mostly I would say yes, but we are still hitting against state statutes, city policies to make sure that those requirements regarding financial management and financial expenditures and receipts are being followed.
Okay. And so overall, you said we have the best rating.
Correct. It's called the highest and cleanest unmodified opinion that we can issue. We issued the city.
One thing I think that, and we've had this discussion many times, but just for the record, right? So Kansas uses a cash basis form of accounting. And then you have GAAP, which is the generally accepted accounting principles. So I don't personally, there may be other states, most states, most places use GAAP, and it will give you a whole different type of reporting here. But even if we did GAAP on our financials, we would still have to do a report in cash for the state because that is their requirement. That everything in this state is really about cash. That's why I think I noted, we didn't have any cash basis violations. So a cash basis violation is you didn't have the cash on hand at the time you made the expenditure, or a budget violation, which means you overspent your budget.
Okay.
Right. So those are things we watch very carefully. By this opinion, in part, he's saying we didn't violate those because those aren't noted in your audit as a violation, and they would be if those were violated. Because those are statutory violations.
Correct.
That well.
Yes.
Anyone else? Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you.
I don't know if we typically have the council accept. Yeah, I'm just thinking, as a formal action to accept the auditor's financial statements for the year ending December 31st, 2021.
Madam Mayor, I make a motion to accept the financial statement and report of city's independent certified public accountants.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call roll?
Adams,
Yes.
Bishop,
Yes.
Malat,
Yes.
Shriver.
Yes. Thank you. Item number 5, considering mayoral
Well, we
appointments
go
to
to
the,
4 first, I'm sorry.
did I just skip 4? I'm sorry. I already crossed it off my list. Your presentation regarding the 98th Street project.
We have with us tonight David Nolte with BHC Engineering. David is the design project engineer. I get the terms wrong. He's the man in charge of this particular project. I think you've seen him here before. I think he's been here with Randy Gordon, who heads up the Public Works Group. Just really wanted to bring you all up to date on this. We're about roughly 2/3 of the way through the project planning process. And we'll be kind of entering that last phase, and thought this was a good time to bring you up to date and highlight a couple items. That I will turn it over.
Well, good evening, Mayor and council members. Like I said, I'm Dave Knowlton, Senior Project Manager for BHC, overseeing this project. And as of right now, you can see at the bottom, we're at the office check stage, which is, like Mike said, about 2/3, 70% done. Kind of signifies the right-of-way acquisition time period. Plans or impacts are pretty much just determined, and so we can go out and acquire easements and right-of-way as needed. But just kind of a refresher, obviously, 98th Street, we're designing it from Kansas Avenue north up to the northern city limits, which is just at the I-70 ramp. We're designing it for, it's going to be posted at 35 or signed at 35, but we designed it 40, 5 miles over. This is a collector standard, and the typical section that you see up there is as if you were standing in the middle of the road looking north. The 10-foot path is going to be on the east side or your right side. We do have the left side or the west side being graded for any future sidewalk or paths that may be considered at that time. We are building a 32-foot back-to-back curb and gutter roadway. And with that, we'll switch over. As I mentioned, the property acquisition, we affected like 20 properties with the improvements completed so far. There's 7 of them, 100% completed, have been paid and completed. There are 3 pending, which the offers have been made. As far as I know, that it's in the process of being accepted. They just haven't accepted the check yet.
Got one additional tonight that's sitting at your place, so yes.
So basically, we're halfway there. And the current expenditure that we've had so far is just over $88,000, which comes into just a little bit under what we had budgeted. Actually, I think the earlier budget, we had a 248, I believe, something like that. So as far as the actual expenditures of the acquisition is coming in under budget. So that's good news. Next. We kind of put in a pre-field check, really rough numbers. That's probably been a year or so ago. And that was right at 8.8 million. As field check came along, which is about 25, 30%, there's a 20% contingency in that number, and we were at 8.5. Next.
How long ago was that 8.5?
It was about, I think that was November of last year.
Late last year.
Okay, so it was before oil went through the roof.
Yeah.
About to see
so,
that.
So yeah, I think that was November, if I remember right. Updated costs, unfortunately, as we compared all the numbers with the recent bids, it's up about 21%. That's including the 10.7 is including all expenditures, whether it's right-of-way design, utility relocation, construction, inspection, includes all of it. The federal funds will still stay the same at 4.8. So for the city fund, as of right now, there'd be an increase of 1.1 in regards to the field check numbers. So it's like, I know you're like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? So next, a couple options that we're talking about. We can stop just on the north side of Riverview. We want to make sure we can complete that intersection so we don't have to impact that in the future again. So if we, and we also have that in as an alternate. So it's one of those things that we can pull it out if we want to, but if bid prices do come in under, we can consider doing that extra 1,100 feet north of Riverview, but we definitely want to do the intersection there. Second thing that we consider is taking the streetlights out. That could be an item that they put in later, or consideration of doing leasing from Evergy, which would be maybe a longer term paving by, a month to month type thing, but it's not that upfront Yeah, that, we're showing at 369,000.
Before we just move off the line, just so on this section, what we're talking about would be a traditional street light, right? So not a specialty light. Most places, street lights are becoming owned by the municipality, and so it's a metered service. So you still have to pay the meter cost. Generally, it's less than the cost to have Evergy put them in and pay a monthly pole rental. So it's a little bit of, you can pay to have them put in early, and you're paying energy cost over time at a lower cost, or the power company puts them in, and of course they're charging you a lease that includes, everything that they think the cost could be. So long-term leasing is a more expensive. Short-term, it's just the acquisition of the lights. There could be some timing in this process, right? So, and I think I was talking about, do we leave them out? You can always add them at any point. We do have a trail section in this road section, and I know you all have heard, well, these things are dark. Why don't we have street lights? We've kind of put with that. So we wanted to show this as an option. We'll probably continue to design it as if it does have it, but we're looking at what are our options if, as we go along to try to get this into a certain budgetary number. So
Mike, Mike, if we put them in and pay for them ourselves, we're responsible for the maintenance on it, correct?
That is correct. And we have, we use a third party, somebody, say Black and Beach, one of the Donald, yeah, or like Total Electric. And the ones we installed on 110th Street and within the Village South area, those are city-owned poles and lights. Generally, most of the time they have pretty long life, right?
Yeah, LEDs.
Less people hit them. That's generally the number one problem with the pole, if somebody hits it, but those at least have insurance coverage, right?
So we were talking about removing streetlights. We're talking about removing the streetlights and running all the lines and everything for them, correct?
Lights,
All the
power.
conduit,
Okay.
junction boxes and everything associated.
Any idea what that by itself would cost?
That's the 369.
That is the 369 if you just separate, you
If
put
we
that
totally
in
took that out,
alone.
Yep, totally separate that out of the project. That'd be 369
But at a later date.
at a later date.
Oh, obviously this is better because you've got grading and all kinds of things you're working with. Well, no, my question is, what would be the estimate if we wanted to put it in 5 years from now? I know we can't project 5 years very well, but it's got to be a multiple of that number.
This number includes, conduit, meter boxes, controls, poles, lights. So if you came in the future, those costs probably stay relatively close, because quite honestly, the contractor, whoever that may be, is going to probably sub that out to one of 2 or 3 companies that do this kind of lighting. So it's just a matter of, is it part of this project, or do we turn around at some future date and put those in? Now, regardless, we'll probably still look at lighting at intersections, right? Just as more of the safety of an intersection lighting, which we did that like on Kansas Avenue. But you're talking a few light poles in the standard. Quite honestly, it's almost more expensive because you have to put in somewhat the same control boxes, meters, and all those things, whether you have one light or you have how many 50 lights. I don't know what the breaker.
That's what I was gonna ask, if it would save money to do half as many lights. And then, but if we're running the same stuff underneath, I guess it doesn't save as much.
It would say, I think the question is, if you said, so this assumes that the lighting, that you'll have a minimum amount of lighting on the roadway for the whole stretch, right? Which is, if you drive, any place where there's general kind of curb guttered roads that are collector, 2-lane, 3-lane road, right? You see how the lights are, and there's kind of constant light through the whole area. I mean, it gets a little darker, and then you kind of get the shadows of the 2 light and then brighter under the light. You could take light poles out, and you would have dark areas in between those. I don't know from an engineering standpoint, but
Savings.
that saves some, but probably you're saving the cost of the pole and the light, you're not saving the wire controller. All the underground, but you still got to run a wire the same distance.
Could you explain what the 20% to 15%?
Oh, excuse me, Mayor. I have one question, one
Yeah,
more question. Chief Mathies, 2 questions for you. Lighting this would make it safer for the public, correct? Right, and also it would make your job easier, correct? If it's lighted and people are walking on the trail?
Yep.
Okay. There you go.
Generally, I think it's part of your answer. Generally, a collector street that has, and this is a multi-purpose trail section on a collector street. I think generally you would see street lighting in that project. If this was a residential area or that type of, you may or may not, that's more of a design residential. Some do, some don't, and you wouldn't have as close.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Now to your question.
Yeah.
On the field check estimate, we always use the 20% contingency, just because we haven't got far enough or that detailed yet into knowing what else we may run into. We typically always use 20% contingency. Office check, obviously, we're a little bit further down the road. We've run into some things that, okay, we figured out we need some more retaining walls and so on and so forth. So we typically reduce that to a 15% contingency. The number that we have shown is still contains the 20%. So that 5% difference is about $350,000.
So between, because we had talked as a council at a previous presentation about this specific project, about cutting it off just on the other side of Riverview, because there's not much. I think there are no homes in Edwardsville on the other side, on the north side of Riverview. And so if we did that and then looked at the 20 to 15% contingency, which is just in our estimates, that would pretty much make up our difference right now.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
Now, from a design standpoint, we're continuing to leave these components in, right? I think the other 2 things, and we'll talk about funding supplement, but so, we're planning, everything we're doing right now is assuming basically a winter, early spring bidding. But remember, this project under KDOT's schedule is really a fall of 2023. So our project was awarded funds for what they call federal fiscal year 24, starts in October, right? So we will have to get some support from KDOT, et cetera, to move this project up. Now, a lot of times that happens because another project is delayed and they're looking for projects to move around. There's also the ability to where a city or an entity can fund the whole project and then get reimbursed for it. Obviously, you got to issue then debt for all of it, and then you get reimbursed at, relatively quickly, but it may be a year or 2 before you get it back. And that's a bigger policy question. The other thing that we have to think about is we've looked at these costs. The cost to borrow has gone up. That much we know. And probably the cost to borrow will go up in the future, at least at this point. If I'm looking out at 2023 or 2024 right now, I would say our cost to borrow goes up. Potentially, the cost of projects may drift back down a little bit right now. Do I think they're going to go down from 13, 14% increase back to 0? No. But is it 7 or 8%? Maybe. But you may not save any money because your cost to borrow has gone up, even though your cost to build has gone down. And so it nets out the same. But those are things we're looking at, is how does timing potentially affect these costs? And obviously, the farther out you get, there's more unknown.
And I noticed on a previous slide that the funding, because this is a grant funded project, I
Right.
believe in 80/20,
Right.
but we're not getting additional funding for where this cost is going up. Is that correct? That we're just covering it entirely by the city? So we're not getting
At this
80% of
At
that?
this point.
So if you remember, we originally got around roughly 3.8 million. ARPA came in. Our project so they had funded all other projects at 80%. And when we say 80%, just so it's 80% of the construction cost and the construction inspection, what they call CE. All the other costs, right-of-way cost, engineering costs, utility relocation, any of those things is wholly on the entity, the city in this case. So we did receive an additional $1 million roughly because our project didn't get funded at the full 80% at that time. Back a year now. ARPA money came in. They said, how are we going to spend the ARPA money? The STP body recommended going down the list and fully funding project that hadn't been fully funded. And then there was some money, there may have been some money left over to go to the next project that didn't get any funding. And I think that's right. I could be wrong. But we got fully funded then at that point. And so we're there. I think the next question that you're asking is really the next item.
And Mike can follow up this too also.
Yeah.
There is an STP meeting this week, I believe it's on Thursday.
Correct.
That we'll be talking more about this, the ARPA, and then all additional discretionary grant funding. So I think federally is like $2.2 billion of discretionary funds that are being dispersed. Mike, and you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, and I serve on the STP board. Additional funding is coming to the region, right? So I think it's the justice and infrastructure something. There's so many acts and grants out there now, I can't keep up with them all. But there's additional funding for infrastructure improvements. Like all of our federal dollars, it drives through the Mid-America Regional Council process. And so we will be having those discussions that starts off at the STP level, moves up through TTPC, and then ultimately the board. I just don't know what those are, but it is possible that they would look to projects that haven't been let yet. So once the money's been dispersed, they pretty much, that's their break point. But for those projects that haven't been funded, they've got the grants, they know what the dollars are, haven't been funded yet. There may be discussion on how do they go ahead and fund up those existing projects? Do they say, no, we're going to go back out and look at new projects? We're going to look at projects that didn't get any funding. Just don't know the answer to that yet. But that is certainly a piece of the puzzle that we'll be engaged in.
Okay.
Michael,
Unless Dusty, you know something else that I haven't.
will it be advantageous in that process for us to be halfway through the right-of-way acquisition and this far down the planning process as we go into those funds?
I believe so,
allocated?
because most of that money has to be allocated and spent over the next 2 to 3 years, right? So kind of 2024 and 2025 fiscal years, right? Federal fiscal years. So you've got to have those dollars obligated and spent. And so their obligation is that once it's obligated, it basically means this is how much money they're putting into the project. And then spent means it's gone out the door, right? So they really want these projects obligated by 24 and spent by 25. That's kind of been the general view. Same with ARPA funds, same with some of the formal funding. They have pretty short time frame. The farther along you are in the processes, the better I think your chances are of getting additional funding.
It's worked to
Because
our
for a
advantage.
project that's not happened yet, it might take the average project takes under KDOT's schedule, 28 months. So if today I got approval from a KDOT to say, yes, you can do a project, that's 28 months in their schedule. We've really pushed them on this project, to be quite honest.
I think it's worked to our advantage on 1 or 2 other projects being pretty far down the road.
Yeah.
In the planning process and the right-of-way acquisitions.
Yes.
And so where we're at right now, obviously we've submitted our office check plans to KDOT. We're waiting for comments to come back on those. We're working on retaining walls, driveways. Of course, we're still working on streetlights. And then lastly, we have to work on the phasing and traffic control so we know where we're starting, and we have dirt to work with so we can put it in areas that we're filling. So we have to work through that, but that's usually that last part of the plans. We're obviously going to finalize right-of-way acquisition. Like I said, there's 10 properties left to get. And we'll meet one more time with utilities just to, again, talk about schedule, talk about relocation, timing, and stuff like that. And then we'll share our final plans with them to coordinate. And Mike has already alluded to the fact of our programmed dollar amounts, and what we're aiming for is November or later this year as far as a letting. So next.
Before we go, I was just gonna say, our goal has always been to try to be about a year, right? We wanted to get this ahead. Even if it doesn't fund until October, we want to be the first project out the door. Now, this is probably an unusual time because there's been a lot of federal funding. But there've been times, I know Mr. Adams has said in TTPC, where there was issues of, we generally program more project dollars than there are projects, because generally projects, they don't, some come in under, some come in over, there's timings, and it all works out. So we'll over program 5 or 10%. But there've been a couple of years where the situation has been, they've all come in, and especially when prices are escalating, they've come in above what everybody budgeted. And generally the rule is there, the first one in gets the money, the last one in doesn't. I mean, broadly. So you want to be prepared to go as early as you can. I would just say on the right of way and easement acquisition, I think that process is going well. What our plan is, which I think we've come to you before, we passed the resolution that basically said, hey, this is a project that meets the requirements necessary for eminent domain, right? Just the statutory requirements. The next step is you would adopt an ordinance for any properties that you've been unable to obtain through the normal process. We probably envision that time being at our first meeting in June, which I think is June 13th, if we haven't gotten these all under process. Once you do that, there's several weeks, so we'll say up to 30 days before you actually file a case at the courthouse. And during all this time, you can continue to negotiate. Once it gets to the courthouse, basically a judge says, yes, this meets all the legal requirements, and they appoint a body, 3 independent appraisers. That process generally takes another 30 days, and then their process takes around 45 days. So even once you adopt the ordinance, there's still anywhere from 2 to 3 months time frame in there for negotiations. And I think I've said this before. In my time here, of all the acquisitions we've done, we've only ever had one property that we literally went through the process, and it wasn't on a road. So I think we try to do a pretty good job working with people. Sometimes it's something, it's not the dollar amount, it's the, I want my driveway relocated 10 feet over because I really wanted it here, or can it save that big tree? I know it's in the right of way, or things of that nature. And I think our team does a good job of saying, hey, if we can do that, will that work? And would you be okay with this dollar? Well, yeah, I'm okay with that if you can do this. So we try to find solutions and not just, here's the money, take it, don't take it, we'll just go to court. That's not the best we do. So
Okay.
I think we're in really good shape on where we're at on acquisition at this point. And I would expect if we don't get all of them, we may have 2 or 3, and a couple of them may be properties that one person owns several properties together. I think it's been pretty positive, everything I've heard.
Very good.
Well, I don't know if you've heard anything else.
No, and that's true. And KDOT, once you do final plans, they want to have all the right of way or easements acquired. So we're on schedule with that. So
And
What's that?
utility relocations is another biggie, and you can't really do that till you get, I mean, the sooner we can get right of way, that means utilities can relocate. And as much as possible, having the utilities relocated before a contractor ever comes into the picture to build the road, the better. Water is always the most challenging one because they really depend on grade more so than, say, an underground electric or even gas. I mean, gas can say, okay, I got to have 4 feet minimum cover, but I'm okay with 6 or 7. Water lines, they get a little more touchy about how much is on top of them or not enough. That's generally the biggest problem. And you can't just, right, you can't really just shut off the water for a while. You got to find other ways.
So we're looking pretty good on the timeline and
I
that
think
sort of
so,
thing.
Yeah,
Okay. Is there anything else that you had for us?
I do not.
Okay.
Questions for you?
Council, did you have any?
I would personally like to say, I don't know if it's, but I think we should stop at Riverview. There's no, like I said, there's no homes that going up north. Saves us what, 860 some grand. And that way we can get streetlights in for the safety of the public.
What we would probably do is include maybe, and that's what we're talking about, a mill and overlay in that area, right? So refresh that. So all that paving is new, obviously a lot. And that could be outside of this project or part of this project. I mean, it's certainly a lot lower cost to mill and overlay than a full depth reconstruction. And it does impact a big portion of that, I think, because of the slopes out there. That's where some of the retaining wall work has to be done. Is that correct?
That's good.
Did anyone else have any?
I agree with that stopping at Riverview.
Yeah.
I think KCK has already indicated they have no interest in coming off of State Avenue down to that with an improvement. So why should we do that? I agree.
I think so. It just makes sense financially. So thanks for coming
All
tonight.
right, thank you.
I appreciate your
Thank you
time.
very
Thank
much.
you. Okay, now, item number 5 on consider mayoral appointments. I'll just touch base on this really quick. Zach has reached out to someone that's supposed to come from the CPPS board, and he is just getting some more details, and we'll get back to us. So we're gonna bump this one to our next meeting and move on to item number 6. Consider recommendation of approval from the Edwardsville Planning Commission regarding the rezoning of property located at 1301 South 94th Street and 1138 South 98th Street, and consider ordinance 1053 finalizing the same.
Bradley Hokaber, our planner, will cover the next 2 items.
Excuse me.
So this is one of 2 zoning requests we have this evening. Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. So on March 7th, 2022, the applicant, Les Hamilton with BHC, who is here this evening, filed application on behalf of the developer, who is Grata LLC, requesting rezoning for land located at 1139 South 98th Street and 1300 South 94th Street to RDNS, Residential Developed No Sewer. Additionally, a preliminary and final plat application for the property has been submitted, the latter of which was included in tonight's consent agenda. The area proposed to be rezoned and platted is 2 parcels consisting of approximately 84.15 acres of land. The property address 1139 South 98th Street is currently zoned AGR Agricultural Residential and consists of a 1,200 square foot single family residence, which will continue to remain as part of this development. The property address 1300 South 94th Street is split between 2 zoning districts, R1 Rural Residential to the west and R3 High Density Residential to the east, and is currently vacant. The developer is requesting the rezoning in order to allow for the construction of single family homes located on 1 acre lots or larger that do not require sanitary sewer. It should be noted that sanitary sewer is not present in this area, but easements were included in the final plat that would allow for future sanitary sewer extension along Betts Creek. On April 20th, 2022, the Planning Commission held a public hearing in regard to this item. No objections to the proposed use were voiced as part of the public hearing, and no protest petitions have been received in regard to this item. So in closing, staff concurs with the recommendation of the Planning Commission to approve ordinance number 1053, authorizing the rezoning of land associated with case 2022-06-Z. So with that, I will hand it over to you all. If you have any questions for the applicant, he is here this evening, or we would be happy to answer any questions for you as well.
I want to note, just because I saw it as we're going through, the addresses, and it's correct in the ordinance, is 1300 South 94th Street, not 1301. So in the subject line in the recommendation, but the ordinance and the notices and everything are correct is the 13.
Mike, I have a question. Approximately how many single-family homes?
In total, they're looking at about 47. They did, if you recall, they did a preliminary and final plat for Groves Phase 1, which will include 13 homes off of 98th Street into 2 cul-de-sacs. And then the other side has a 34 to 36 home site. They are in the process of platting the other side. So this previously, as most people know, the portion off of 94th Street was the old Braintree apartment, which is why it's zoned in that R3 high density. And the other parcel was the land that we commonly refer to as the former shooting range, which was undeveloped property, other than there's a detention facility which will be left in place as part of the project. So all of the lots are going to be in excess of 1 acre. Probably the average is probably getting closer to 1.5 acres. Some of them have large, or 2 or 3 acres, but a portion of it may be in the drainage easements, because this is kind of the top end of what we refer to as the unnamed tributary of Betts Creek. So it leads into Betts Creek at the south end down by Gate 32. So fair amount of drainage through that.
And just from a real estate standpoint, this is the kind of residential development I think is really good and beneficial for Edwardsville. This will be a higher end when you're looking at the larger lots like that. This is really, I think, going to be a substantial improvement, and especially from what it was zoned before. When we're moving from a high density housing to single family homes that are going to be folks that are generally planting their roots here, investing in our communities, are going to be owner occupied properties. I think that's a great move.
So I think that the intent of it, right, and zoning is zoning, but still with the RD and S, right, the minimum requires 1 acre lots. They'll be on aseptic systems, right? Even if they ever put sewer in and want to be connected to the sewer, as far as the zoning, it still requires 1 acre lots. Kind of the intent is, the roads will be more of a rural feeling, so they're going to be an asphalt road, but they'll be like 24-foot wide and utilize a bar ditch design versus a curb gutter design. And they have plans in for how the driveways will be built and all of those things. So you're really talking about what you would typically think of as a rural subdivision. But obviously the benefit is the proximity to all the things that people enjoy being in Edwardsville for. I can get to the airport, I get downtown, I get to Lawrence, I get to the south, I can move about pretty easily. So
Absolutely.
that is the intent of the project.
Madam Mayor, I make a motion. Did you want to make a motion to accept ordinance number 1053? I won't read the whole thing, but it's in accordance with the amending the official zoning map referred to and made by part of the zoning recommendations by ordinance 963 and as recommended by the Planning Commission.
I'll second that. And I would note this is a governing body vote on zoning to the governing body.
We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call roll?
Adams,
Yes.
Bishop,
Yes.
Malott,
Yes.
Shriver,
Yes.
and Mayor Gayheart.
Yes. All right, item number 7, consider recommendation of approval from the Edwardsville Planning Commission regarding the rezoning of property located at 502 Highland Drive and consider ordinance number 1054 finalizing the same.
This is another zoning case that has to do with residential, new residential. On March 3rd, 2022, the applicant, Dustin Baker of Highland Development LLC, who is here this evening, filed an application to rezone land located at 502 Highland Drive to R2 medium density residential. The area proposed to be rezoned is one parcel consisting of approximately 11.5 acres of land. The property is currently zoned R1 rural residential and consists of 4 renter occupied dwelling units of various sizes. The applicant is requesting the rezoning in order to allow for the construction of 25 owner occupied townhomes, resulting in 50 livable units as part of the Rural Housing Improvement District approved by the council on September 27, 2021. On April 20th, 2022, the Planning Commission held a public hearing in regard to this item. City staff, the developer, and several individuals spoke at the public hearing. No objections to the proposed use were voiced at the hearing, and no protest petitions have been filed or received in regard to this item. In closing, staff concurs with the recommendation of the Planning Commission to approve ordinance number 1054, authorizing the rezoning of land associated with case 2022-04-Z. As I mentioned, the developer and applicant is here this evening. If you have any questions for him, or we're open to answer any questions you may have.
Mike, I got a note on this one about there was a sidewalk included in the original development agreement.
Correct.
And in the note, it said it was changed because of ADA requirements. Who is it that determines that all sidewalks have to be ADA required? Meet ADA requirements.
Well, I think under the American with Disabilities Act, which is a federal act, state basically sets out the guidelines. So when we first did that, we thought we could go, and of course, it's not subject to the zoning, but to be able to go above that, where that detention basin is going to be, but it really drops off, comes back up, spend some time out in the field. And, you know, I mean, it could be, in the future, it might be just a path, right? An undeveloped path. But if it's a sidewalk of any type, then it has to meet ADA. If it's along a street, the standards are different. So if it adjoins a street, the street might have 8% slopes, 9% slope. But if it's an actual path or a sidewalk or a trail, you can only get certain slopes for certain distances. Engineer could probably tell you better what those numbers are, but it drops way down. When you look at the topos by aerial topos, it doesn't show to be that steep, but it's probably because tree cover. So, you know, all that's done by aircraft or satellite, and it doesn't show it to be as bad as it is actually out of the field.
Okay.
What the developer, partially out of our planning commission meeting, there was some questions about some of the property owners that would be to the south about if, you know, their kids, so High Street, 7th Street, that area over there, if they came across being able to walk sidewalks around there. So the developer agreed to extend it around that cul-de-sac. And we had already talked about having something on site, on that side over there, a gazebo type structure, something like that. So there will be a continuous path from all the way through that subdivision to the existing sidewalks back up to the school. So children could walk on the sidewalk from within that development, or quite honestly, even if they came from the west or came from the east or from the south, we'll be able to access those sidewalks and get through.
Okay.
They added additional amenity, somewhat to offset this issue of, you know, hey, we thought we were going to be able to do this, we can't.
So they weren't previously going to do the sidewalk that connects to.
They planned, I mean, everybody planned to be able to get, the part they added was not initially going to be in the project. Everybody planned to go across, and we have the developer here. I mean, he was fully prepared to move forward with getting across there until we kind of got out there in the field and went, oh, this isn't this isn't as easy as we thought it was gonna be.
Can you
So,
describe again, just so I can try to follow you,
Right.
what wasn't originally planned and what they're doing now instead?
So, and we don't, I don't guess we have, I'm sorry, we don't have it up on the, so if you came, so the sidewalk is on the north side of the subdivision.
Mhm.
And the very last lot stops just before you get to the cul-de-sac, right? And then
Yeah.
it's 2 tracks of just open space land. Thank you. Is that the latest? And then what they did is they continued it around, and I can come up here, show it to you. So what we, I was trying to think, so originally it was going to end right here at this lot. This is the last lot for a house here.
The sidewalk was gonna end there?
Right, and
Okay.
so they carried that sidewalk all the way around the cul-de-sac and tied it in with the gazebo type structure on this lot that'll be an amenity lot. If that makes sense. So they're carrying that sidewalk all the way around the cul-de-sac. At some point, this road will continue through, they dedicated the right of way, at which point, will it, that sidewalk will get extended out to 102nd, but we're nowhere close to.
And where's the steep area where the detention pond is?
The detention pond is down here,
Oh, okay.
and we were gonna try to come across here, but it just very steep and a lot of grade in there.
Okay.
And so it just wasn't, I mean, we were gonna get on this other person's property.
Yeah.
He came and spoke and, he wasn't excited about.
Oh, I thought it was all city right of way.
This is city owned, right?
Okay.
But the water will ultimately contain here. They're going to upgrade that part of their development agreement. And we'd hope to be able to just kind of build that around it, but it just, again, it's so much lower. You can see how the grade lines, it just drops off.
Yeah.
It'd be like standing here and then trying to be above the exit sign. I mean, there's just no way to build a sidewalk that we stand.
But you said eventually, oh, you can have a seat if you want, but if you said eventually we might get to where there's a more of a path
Yeah, I
there.
mean, what we talked about is, and maybe it becomes a natural trail through this. So once everything's
Mhm.
cleaned up, the homes are built there. I think all of us, without saying it's a formal path, kids tend to find a way to make the path where they want to go, right? And at that point, maybe it's a semi-improved path, right? A mulch path or a rock path or something.
Okay.
But
And I
it's
wonder,
probably
since
best to
Mr.
wait.
Baker's here, is that something that you would be interested or able to do, is just put a mulch path in there? Because I think that would be a lot less expensive, but since the equipment and everything will be there, is that something you'd be able to do?
Yeah, we can do that. I said that we could do that when we were on site. And Mike and I talked about it, the main issue is maintain
Mhm.
over time. But,
I
have
think it's
no
pretty
problem
steep, yeah.
doing that.
Okay.
It's just more of a, over time, with the steepness of the slope, is you have big rain, it's gonna wash all the mulch or rock or anything that you put down, it's gonna wash it.
Right. And I've seen sometimes they'll put like some timbers in every 3 feet or so just to help retain it a little bit, but I understand that might wash out. I just thought while the equipment is there, since you're already willing to do it, maybe we go ahead and establish that path.
We can, I mean, again, we also want to, from a safety, I mean, technically, this is on city property too, right? I mean, that piece of property is city property. We just want to be cognizant that we're not also creating some problem in there. So at least in the initial part of the project, we want those sidewalks. We want children to be able to walk on a concrete
Oh, I'm not saying-
sidewalk to get there, right?
I'm not saying instead of
Right.
the sidewalk.
Yeah, I understand.
But just since you said, well, they're gonna make a way, they'll go there
Yeah.
anyway, he's
Yeah.
willing to do it. So
Sure.
it seems like it would be a wise idea. And then if it's city property, then the city
Right.
can keep it up to.
We'll continue. I mean, again, we're a little ways from the, we've had a lot of discussions, just timing, what's the right time, right? Why they're in there cleaning, but at the same time, you want to let some growth. I mean, again, I know we have the RHID funds in there, right? So these could be used to help offset some of those costs as we move forward. fundamentally the first place is, right, streets, water, sewer, sidewalks, the fundamental infrastructure first and foremost.
Yeah, I think the path would be more so when we're getting closer to that building
Yeah.
stage.
Right.
And there will be some tree clearing and even suggested, taking those trees that they cut down, mulch them up and set them aside. So if that time does come, we've got all that stuff. So, and like you said,
Very
he's open to implementing that trail. It's just a matter of where can we actually get through.
Right.
And I think through the clearing process, we'll have a better idea of what route we can take.
Yeah. And I think the fact that he's here and saying, hey, we're willing to work with you and get this stuff done to make it great for everybody speaks a lot. Did you have something you want
Yeah,
to?
well, I was just gonna say, the other aspect is really just the safety issue. So as long as we're all in agreement that we go out there, we clear, we look at it, we look at the grade, and if we determine, or if Mike or city staff, if we want to write it in there, something to the effect that city staff is willing to take on the risk of maintaining that and having kids ride their bikes down this, which is gonna happen. I'm not opposed to building it. I'm just saying, looking at it, if you're on site and you think, okay, there's gonna be a trail, it's a safety concern.
Pretty steep. I think relative to the zoning here, the zoning is about that use of property. We have the development agreement in place. We have the RHID pieces in place. They've got the preliminary plat. They'll be doing final plat. I mean, I think it is a little bit of a, I hate to say handshake, but agreement. I mean, it's an amenity for them as well, but it's also, we want to make sure it's a safe place, right? We don't, again, we also have to worry about the water comes down there. We don't want to back up water onto the adjacent property owner because they won't be happy about that as well. So we have a lot of moving pieces around that, but if we can do it and it can be done in a safe way and be used, I think everybody's in agreement what the method is, whether it's some timbers out there that makes some steps, whether it's just a compost kind of path, whether it's a rock or maybe even has to have a small concrete at the bottom of it for water to go over so it doesn't want to.
Yeah.
And again, we all met out there, engineers met out there. I think we're all in agreement that it's not as, when we did that, we thought, oh, it just drops down a little bit, goes across, comes back up, no big deal, right? Grade it off, put a 5-foot path through there or 10-foot path, whatever, and away you go.
Yeah.
But as you get out and you start seeing what's there, it's not quite as simple.
Well, I think, and we don't need to get stuck on it for
Right.
too long. We can keep moving. I just thought it sounds like it would fit more of a natural trail walking path.
Mhm.
And there are things you can do to make sure kids aren't, you can do things so it's not a bicycle trail.
Right.
But yeah, I think we'll just keep moving in that direction.
From the zoning, I mean, the zoning is right in keeping with what we've been doing all along for this project. The adjacent property to the south, right, is zoned the same. It's in keeping with our comprehensive plan from a zoning standpoint. I think our recommendation certainly is approval based on the factors that are.
I'd like to make the motion that we approve ordinance number 1054, the 502 Highland Drive project 2022-04-C.
Second,
We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call roll?
I have a question first. That house on the west side, does that go or stay? The one that's right there, the first one as you go up,
They're all going.
they all go? Okay, great, thank you.
Adams,
Yes.
Bishop,
Yes.
Malat,
Yes.
Shriver,
Yes.
and Mayor Carey.
Yes. All right, item number 8, city manager report. And section A is hearing a presentation on construction methods for public projects.
Oh, okay. Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. Kind of in a follow-up to our workshop meeting when we were talking about facilities and and how, where do we go from, hey, we have these needs, how do we want to progress? And there's really kind of two questions out there we need to kind of talk about, and this is the first part of that. But the first part is, what process do we use to construct things? So, and that could be roads, that could be buildings, that could be really anything. And then two, what's the next step to decide where we go from there? So tonight, really what I'm talking about is there's three basic processes. We'll go through each of those, a little bit of pro and con on those, and then and kind of just have some discussion. And then we can get into any other formal manager staff report. So the first method, the one that probably everybody's pretty familiar with, is what's called design bid build. Right? So an entity, city in this case, you're going to build a building. You could do this with a road and do it with an engineer, but you go out and you hire a professional. So you hire an architect and you say, hey, Mr. Architect, we want to build this building, and he says, great. And he starts the process and asks a bunch of questions. And at some point comes back and he says, here's the plans to build your building. And they're all ready to go. And we now put it out for bid through the city and say, tell us how much this project's going to cost us. And you do the bidding and the bids come back in, and now you know basically what your cost is, right? So kind of at the end of the process, you got a bid and it's for everything. And you say, I like it, I don't like it, but you pretty much, it's either accept it all or reject it all, right? In the way that cities work. So you kind of accept or reject the bid. And if you accept it, they put, the final touches together, the architect, you hire whoever contractor, ABC Contracting, they start building the project, and away you go. Go to the next slide. So, somewhat the pros of that is that's very typical, right? I mean, people even do it with houses, right? You want to build a new house, you go hire an architect, they draw you some really nice pictures. They tell you it's going to cost this much money. You put it out to bid. Sometimes you're surprised by how much it costs more than what that bid was. But it's easy to understand, right? I mean, it's 3 steps. It's pretty easy. The biggest con in this process, or negative maybe, is the city ends up hiring the architect, and then the city ends up hiring the contractor. And when there's disagreements of whether something was in the plans or not in the plans, or whether this meant this or this meant that, the city becomes the arbitrator and has to say, well, no, the plans say this, go build this, Mr. Contractor, and they get upset or whatever. So you become an arbitrator. And those things happen. I mean, just about every project that happens, especially remodel projects. So those are probably the hardest ones. Probably Mr. Bishop could agree, because you don't know what you have until you get there. But those make it. Your costs are not known till kind of the end of it. I mean, obviously you're putting some estimate together, but oftentimes the architect hasn't given you much information about the market. And so by the time you get there and you bid it, that's your price. And you don't really have a time to adjust the price at that point. And it generally takes the longest because you kind of have 3 separate processes. Step 1, step 2, step 3, you kind of go down the road. So that's kind of the design build. The next one, which you see a lot more happening in the market, and again, not just buildings, but all kinds of projects, what they call design build. And in this case, what happens is the entity, city here, you put out a request for proposals for a design build team. And that team involves an architect, it involves a general contractor, and it generally involves an engineer, and there may be some other players in it. Again, depends what you're building. But you go through a process, you pick that team. You pretty much have told the team at the front end what you're building, and you generally have at least a broad scope of the project and budget. They then go and they prepare a set of plans, not unlike what you saw tonight from our engineering, where there's a field check and then an office check and then a bid check. They do generally the same thing. There's a 30%, a 70%, and a 90% set of plans, right? So you kind of step through. When you get up to that 90%, they say, this is what it's going to cost, and we're going to give you a guaranteed maximum price. This is the maximum price you're going to build for this building based on this set of plans. So they take the risk of adjustment, right? Now, if something comes in under, generally they benefit from that. So they said, hey, flooring was going to cost, $100,000 in this building and it only cost 90,000. They generally get the benefit of keeping it. You can negotiate that and say, hey, if there's savings, we get a certain percentage of it. They generally want you to go the other way on any risk if there's something unknown, but it's possible. And then you go to construction. So from a timing standpoint, it's a quicker method. Next slide, please. So somewhat the pros are kind of the opposite of the other. I mean, you have one entity you're dealing with. So as the project owner, you're dealing with that group as a whole, right? You're not dealing with individual pieces. Your architect and contractor share a common goal. I say this in jest, but it is somewhat true. Architects often look and they say, I've got this beautiful blank canvas here, and I'm going to draw you a really pretty picture. And we all go, man, that looks great. That's wonderful, et cetera. And the contractors and engineers come in and say, well, that's wonderful, but how do you build that? And generally the engineer says, well, I'm going to overbuild it because, right, I'm going to make sure it doesn't fall down. So I'm put too much. And then you got a general contractor says, I built 100 of these and I don't know why you're putting all this in there, or you didn't think about how this worked. This kind of brings that group together. It's good to know what your price is. Again, we were kind of talking about this process before, but I mean, there's cost to do this, right? I mean, you still have a cost to get to the point, but you get to a point and you know what your costs are going to be, and now you can go out and issue debt or do whatever you need to do to get it to the next point. Again, design build team takes the risk versus the city, and as I said before, it's pretty quick. There's a little bit less engagement by the city to a certain point, right? Which isn't bad. I say it as a con. It's kind of both. I mean, you're not playing the guy that has to be between, different parties. So you have a little bit less that you have to do. That can be good or bad. The thing that probably gets brought out more than anything is there's not necessarily a public bidding piece of it, right? So the question is, well, how do we know we got the best price? Well, you got the price through this process of getting to a guaranteed maximum price, and they should demonstrate how they got to their pricing, right? We're going to spend this much for concrete, et cetera, and so forth. So you have it, but they're going out and selecting their subcontractors, who they are. We're not bidding it out to one general contractor who also has gone out and bid, he's already got his own prices. So there's a little less public bidding in there. I don't know that that's a negative per se, but if you're really all about, I want to make sure we do a public bid for the building, then this process doesn't really do that. And then the last one is, and as you see, I got a lot of arrows and things, and I've done a project under all three of these methods. So one isn't better or worse than the others. It's really decision. The construction management at risk is exactly what it means. Effectively, you as the city become the general contractor. You hire a construction manager, a professional, but they're over here on their side, so they work with you, but they're not going to build it. They're not the general contractor. They bring that experience to the process, and then you go out and hire an architect like you would in a typical process. But that general contractor saying to the architect, hey, instead of doing it this way, have you thought about doing it this way? Or we could do this. Generally, you kind of have a set price on what you think you want to spend for a project. The biggest difficulty there, I can tell you from my experience, we did two projects at the same time. One, we used construction management at risk, and we had pretty much the same budget for both of them. The first one, we held to the budget. The second one, not to pick on a mayor, but we had a mayor that says, oh, but I want to add this, and I want to add this, and I want to add this. And we added all kinds of things, but said, but we're not going to add any to the budget. So we started taking money out of the parks budget. We started taking money out of the street budget. We started taking all these other places. We didn't really save anything on the project, right? We just took it out of different buckets. But the good thing is you generally have a budget established pretty early in this process. Again, you go through the plan development. Really where the difference is here is you bid by elements. So all projects are broken down by various elements. So you have like site concrete, you might have asphalt, steel, framing, roofing, all those components, right? They break those down in the architect book. They kind of have these broken down by section. So the city literally bids roofing, bids framing, right? You use your construction manager to do that. That's your professional. But you bid all those components out. And so at the end, you know what your price is. The good part about that is if something is a bust, and the example I can give you, we had a project and we got site concrete. So not the foundation, but all the site concrete, curbs, gutters, driveway, and it just came in way over budget, right? So in a traditional process, your whole bid would come in over and you would just reject it because it's over by 30%. This particular one, well, what we found out was on that same day, the Department of Transportation was bidding a big project that had lots of concrete in it, right? So nobody cared about our project. They wanted to go get the big project. And so they just threw dollars at it. We were able to go back out and bid just that piece, but we were able to move forward with construction, and we waited and then bid our concrete. So you have more flexibility in it, but you don't really know your final cost till more at the end of it. It is much more time intensive. You really have to have a person on the staff who's dedicated to the project, I mean, whatever project it is, because they're going to work day in and day out with that construction, pretty much from the time you start it to the time you finish it. So it's a more intensive project. Personally, I don't think we're probably geared for that, but these are the methods. Give me one more slide. And again, I've kind of already, talked about it. You can control the cost of the process, but you also take on the risk, right? I mean, there's nobody giving you a guarantee except when you bid this piece of it and you bid this piece and you add them all up. Again, it really is very difficult on having a staff person, which I show it to you because it's one of the methods. Can we do it? We could do it. It's probably not what I would, from a city manager, recommend for our community. It works well. A lot of schools use this method and it works really well, but they generally have people that they can dedicate to a project. So you see a lot of schools use this method. That's really it on the three processes. I would say the second piece of this discussion is you can select your process, but we also have to select what it is we want to achieve. And so I know we've talked a lot about city facilities, right? And I'm going to say that inclusively. So we've talked about public works facilities, talked about police facilities, fire facilities, administrative facilities. How do we've had plans before, right, where we have a facility that houses, police, fire, and admin in one facility. We've talked about building facility that's a police fire facility and then reutilize an existing facility, i.e. a fire station. We've talked about separate facility for public works, but maybe it's public works and parks. It just, the two places we need to make decisions to move forward in this process is method and scope of project, right? What do we want to do and what's our kind of priority? You can do, I mean, they're all doable. It's not really a dollar and cent discussion, right? I mean, it's not, there's cost decisions there, but it's not like if I go, well, if I use design bid and I separate police and fire from admin, I'm going to save a bunch of money, or if I put them all together, I'm going to save a lot of money. There's probably some of both, but it's not, you're not talking 20 and 30%. You're talking 2%, 5% differences, right? Because you still have to build walls and whatever it is that you got to build, parking, all those pieces that go with it. You're going to need the same amount of parking. You don't need a lot of parking for police and fire, for public parking, but you got to have a whole lot if you're going to have administrative facilities that have council rooms in them, courts, right? That's what creates our parking here. It's, police department probably has 1 or 2 cars at a time from the public. They need parking for their police vehicles, fire trucks, right? They need covered parking in those. They need parking for their employees, so 10 parking places and they're good to go. Can't use 10 parking places for the admin part because you wouldn't have any place to park for court and special events and activities. So that's really what I wanted to present tonight. If there's questions, kind of where do we go from here is kind of where I'm at, just so we keep moving forward, because that's kind of what I heard from the council during our workshop, and want to keep moving forward at the rate y'all want to move forward.
Councilmember Malat was involved with Anderson and his group, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he served on the committee when we selected
And what,
study.
do you remember when they talked about, was it better to combine everything together or?
All three with the exception of public.
Okay.
Put them in one building.
Because you guys even got into square footage and everything, didn't
Pretty
you?
much, with the layout of the land, the north section of this would have been the ideal spot. And I think both the chiefs were involved in those meetings too. And it was working out pretty good. Or, the company, what was the name of the company?
The architect,
Yeah.
it was Arc Images.
Arc Images.
So I think where the benefit comes of a singular building is around your support facilities, right? Where do I put my computers? Where do I have copy machines? Where do I do mail? Where do I have conference rooms, right? So when I'm in separate places, I've got to have telephone system in 2 places. I've got to, I may be in a network, but I still got to have rooms for computers. I might be able to have, 4 combined conference rooms, let's say a big one and 3 small ones for everybody. But if I'm in 2 buildings, I got to have 2 big ones and two, and then, a big one in each building and then 2 smaller ones in each building. So I build more space to support the same thing.
Right.
That's the downside of separating into buildings. Obviously, police and fire's uses, broadly speaking, are less public intensive, right? I mean, that is, you don't have people walking through their facilities and coming in and things. City halls tend to be more public intensive. So it's just some of those kind of decision makings. There's some, there's some benefits from debt issuance, quite honestly, with different methods too, as far as processes you have to go through. Whether it's a remodel or whether it's new facilities, whether it's public safety, not public safety, there's some discussions around that as well. But
Do the plans that we have with ARC, do they take us down this road at all on any of these design processes?
we were probably 30%, that first step, quite honestly. I mean, we had total sizing, we had floor layouts, we had those types of pieces in there. I think what we hadn't made decisions on is, are you going to have a community room, a public community room accessible as part of that building, or maybe it's some other place? Are you going to, is court, are you going to put court there, not put court there? Some of those types of pieces we really didn't have, but the concept was a central point of access. So you came into the building in one location, and then you could access what you need. So if I need to pay a utility bill, go to this window. If I needed to pay a ticket, go to this window. I need to get a police or fire department, report, I can go to this window. So it was kind of a centralized location. Most of your secure areas were upstairs, right? So council room, things like that were on the first floor, so that you could access those after hours without entering the building. For general public, you could access it. We're here, right? You got to open your building up to access it, people's offices and things like that. In a preferred world, you wouldn't have that, right? That's why we don't do court here anymore, because it's such a challenge to have 200 people sitting in our hallways and you're trying to conduct business.
They had also designed in little rooms for attorney.
Sure, yeah. So I would say we were at that.
Judging stage.
Now, now the question is, and I don't have the answer, is that the right? I think you could take that information and put it out for an RFQ for design build teams, whether that's the best team, right? And I think that was part of the question is, we went through the process of saying we want to get a good handle on our building assessment of our existing buildings and what our future needs are. We never really went out and said, now we want to go to that next step of selecting a team. We were kind of using KBS and ARC Images in that way. They certainly, I'm certainly sure they would like to do a project like that, obviously, right? That's what they do for a living. Whether that's the best team, whether they together is the best team, right? I mean, it could be hey, KBS, but they'd rather partner with, a different architecture firm that maybe has more experience in public services. And ARC Images may say, we really rather work with a different contractor that we do more business with, right? We've done 3 or 4 projects, we'd rather work with them. They were kind of, I don't want to say forced together, but somewhat they kind of came together separately at that point, because we hired ARC Images to do the building planning. We used KBS to help us predominantly work on demolition of these buildings and to give us some input on cost. So they were never really a team in that sense. And I would say, I would put it back out for an RFQ for the team if the design build is the method.
Some of the criteria has changed too, because we're moving ahead on 2 housing developments as we speak.
Right.
And that's got to have an impact on what we do now. It's
Sure.
going to have an impact on both the fire and police
Sure.
department.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it would have to just kind of start over, but we've already kind of got our feet in the water on what we kind of want.
Well, I think what we have is we have a foundation to take out, right?
Mhm.
So we don't necessarily need to do a new facility study, right? The things that we have talked about are still the same thing, right? As far as additional space needs, right? What are the things in the police department that we need that we don't have, right? Whether it's interview rooms, whether it's sally ports, et cetera. What is it in the fire station that we need? We need living quarters, right? We need kitchen facility. None of that's changed. We planned on adding people, right? We built into it some amount of growth. We planned on having a full-time planner, but we didn't have a full-time planner at the time we did that, right? But we said, well, we're going to have an office, whether it's a contractor coming in or somebody, we need space for that. So I think the space study and everything around that gives us a really good basis to be able to put it out and start getting, if that's the way we want to go, that request for proposals for a design build team, if that's what we want to do.
So
If
would
we
that
wanna
be the
go to
next,
this-
would that be the next step?
Yes, that would be the next step, subject to, right, are we building a single facility, or are we going to try to build, or that's the path we're going to go down, right? We don't want to go down a path and then turn around and say no. Is that the path we want to go down, or do we think there's any benefit to having separate facilities? Again, I think from a staff standpoint, we would say having a single facility has a lot of efficiencies to it. And in the end, it probably is a cheaper, it's probably less expensive to build because you're building one row. I mean, you've got common walls, right? So you're not building separate walls, et cetera. I don't know whether you could turn that fire station into an administrator. I mean, I'm sure everything can be done. Whether it would make any sense financially to try to do that, I don't know. Then what's its use? What do we use it for, another public purpose, or we've talked about for a private purpose?
Yeah, and yeah, in my mind, obviously the most practical is the one facility. And I think it probably maybe even saves some personnel, 1 or 2 personnel in the process possibly. And, but, I guess I have this fantasy of the fire station being this really cool city hall. But I think probably for the citizens and for the economy of it all, personnel building and everything, it's probably better to look at a singular location or singular building.
Yeah.
For,
The one thing the single location does to, I would say a pro, right, is when you're ready to move into it, you can move everything at once, right? So you don't have to move and move and move or bring stuff here and bring stuff. When you do two buildings, right, you can say, okay, we're going to put police and fire in a building and we're going to get them all done, but you got to pretty well leave the rest of it here until you then get that and then go do all that and figure out the linkages. So from just a pure process and move and activity, a single place works best.
right. So,
But I agree with you. I mean, I look at it and say, well, that fire station, what kind of cool thing could you do? Quite honestly, it might just cost you more money.
well, I'd be personally would be interested in having the Highland, the group that is doing the Highland development
Right.
and made the proposal previously
Right.
for this area, is whichever way we decide to do is re-engage them on development of the rest of the property to revitalize the downtown area.
But it could work right in with the new part, with the park development that's going on down there. You know,
Sure.
we're trying to do the river access and all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe a private facility.
I mean, the good thing is, right, we have right, because remember, we've gone back and forth, but you have a vacant piece of land there, relatively flat, right? I mean, there's not a lot of I mean, yeah, we got to move the electric because it goes through the middle. But I mean, relatively speaking, it's unencumbered, right? I don't have to work around something. I mean, you could build whatever you want there and everything on this side stays exactly as it is till you're done, right? You don't have to interfere with anything.
So what do we have to do to keep moving forward?
Do we have an action item or was it just?
Well,
kind
I
of a
think the
presentation
action
to let
item
us
is-
know? There's not a vote or anything, correct?
Well, I mean, I don't think we're at I mean, the action item would be between these two things. I didn't know where y'all would be. If the action item would be, we want to move forward with pursuing a single facility utilizing the design bid process, then that gives us direction. I mean, there's several steps to come back.
I
right?
think if we're gonna do any action, that probably needs to be on the agenda.
That's
for a vote.
true,
So
right. But knowing where you want to go helps us,
Sure.
then what do we put on an agenda?
So
right?
for the method, that's what we're looking at tonight primarily.
Really,
Michael, I want to, remember what we talked about a few years ago, a company wanted to come here and build some retail
right.
and some apartments. Is that still in the works?
Well, yes and no. I mean, and that was Alcove Development, right? And they're doing other projects.
Yeah.
Would they come? I just in my discussions with them, I don't think that's an idea that's dead. I think that what's dead out of it, you can't do anything until we get out of the way. Fundamentally, we're in the way.
Well, I believe
Yeah.
this because, I mean, I've got a little experience in this.
You do, yes.
You should put the retail up front where everybody can see it.
Yeah.
The city hall and city services are they're not supposed to be out right out in front. Now, Johnson County does that because they can afford it and they got bigger chunks of land. But I believe the retail should be right out front where everybody can see it. They don't have to you can't see it with the big city hall in the way. That's what I believe.
But partly here, I think the city facilities help draw people in because they come pay bills. I mean, we've talked about it, right? Now, if you were saying, do you build here or do you build up on K32? Because K32's got more visibility. I would say you stay here because if you abandon here, what happens? I think
I agree
nothing
with that.
positive. On this particular piece of property, I'm not sure how much that will differ in what the final outcomes are, right? It's going to be a challenge to build any retail here broadly without some forms of incentives or directions or public engagement, I think.
Well, I think part of our discussion I got to sit in on one meeting, which was really exciting. I'm jealous that you were in on many of the meetings, but is that if you put it up on the north, you don't have to disrupt anything,
Right. I
all the
understand
goings
that.
on, but you could put it as far south as possible. And I think if I remember right, it's gonna be on the west side of it'll be on the northwest corner, basically, right?
There was a kind of conceptual view of it. I think the fire was on the northwest where they could come drive through bays, wouldn't have to west drive through bays and so forth.
And some of that could be, I mean, right, that site could be
But if you do what you're wanting to do, these guys are gonna get displaced because you're gonna have to demolish this building and put it here.
I
That was-
understand that.
Right. that
Yeah,
was a
I
lot
will,
of
I will say
discussion about-
this, you know,
And that's
We
an
don't-
option. Certainly.
Right.
our two tenants that we have now, I say tenants because they are, because we own the building, right? Both want to stay, and as you know, one of them wants to grow, right? And we can't accommodate that today. We don't have any way to accommodate that, right?
But to keep us on agenda, I was wondering if Councilman Bishop, because he has a lot of experience in the construction, if you had any thoughts on these the best methods on
I
design,
would-
bid, build, or.
I would do design build. It's, you're still interacting, we're still interacting with the contractors, but you're not going, if you have to take everything out for bid from an individual person, that's a mess.
Yeah.
I mean, I have my own subcontractors I use for every single job. I know what they charge, but if you go down that road, they got to go out and get at least 3 concrete bids, or at least 3, steel erection bids. The design build, I think, would suit us better because we don't have staff, quite frankly, to do the other two.
The other problem, and I wouldn't say problem, I mean, so the traditional method, and I've had this happen too, on a fire station, we hired a contractor because they were the lowest bid, right? Lowest best bid, I mean, right, they had all the requirements. Until then the building got hit by a storm and then it fell down and their concrete subcontractor was horrible. And, you don't know who their subs are and you don't always have a good track record with that. In that design bid, you're getting to pick, right? You're not picking your contractor based on the lowest bid. You're picking them on the best qualified people. And again, if I was going to go hire Mark Bishop to do a project for me, I know he has qualified subcontractors, right? If I hire somebody else, I don't necessarily know who those are. And that's part of the process, right? Who are your subcontractors? Who are you using, right? That's part of your process in that RFQ process. So you're hiring based on qualifications, so you get the right team versus I'm hoping I get the right team at the lowest price.
And it
That-
seemed
that's
like
really the
that one
design.
was kind of the middle ground between the two. Is that right, Councilman Bishop? And the risk and the cost, and
Right.
things like that, and time involved.
But you can actually request who the subcontractors
Oh, yeah, no,
are
we
and their
would.
experience.
Yeah, absolutely. You
I mean,
would
I
do
know
that
Jay
in
Dunn
that
does that.
RFQ process.
Or maybe
100%.
avoid some.
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, I mean, J.E. Dunn does that, Turner, a lot of big ones do that.
Okay, just for clarification. Councilman Bishop said design build, and you've used the terminology design bid a couple.
Well, design build. Yes.
Okay, I
design
just want to
build.
clarify
Yeah, no,
that
no,
we're
Design build. Design
both
build,
on the
yeah,
same
right.
page here.
Yeah, design
We
build.
don't have staff
correct.
to design it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd be glad to take it on, but.
And then I think the other question, if
For a
there's,
nominal fee.
Will the auditor?
we can start that
Resign.
process of putting those RFQs together.
Maybe a little conflict.
I think that's part of the process.
Sure.
I do think at least we need to be thinking I think what I'm hearing, and you'll correct me, right? Again, we're not making final decisions, but it sounds like the general consensus would be that a single facility would be the preferred over 2 separate facilities.
When you're saying single facility, you're not including public works though,
I'm
correct?
not
Because that
including
would be a
public works.
separate.
Yeah, that would be a separate.
Okay.
building, right. I'm saying administrative, police, fire. So public safety and administration building, right? However you want
I feel like that makes the most sense.
This ARC, are they, how many police and fire stations have they built? I mean, designed?
to. Who's that?
ARC?
Oh,
Arc.
ARC Images?
Yeah, ARC, yeah.
I think they've done.
They've done several. most of their work when they came here, a lot of their work had previously been in the St. Louis area, and they had done a number of combined facility. Some were police and admin, some were fire and police, some individual fire. I know, and I know, I mean, they've done a couple of individual fire facilities in the region now. I don't know that they've done any administrative facilities in this area. Again, I don't think at this point we're connected to or should be connected to any team. I think we should go out and say, we're looking for a team based on these criteria and go through that process of selection. That's
Mike, let
really
me ask you
critical.
one question. I'm
Sure.
sorry. So are there cities around here that have this concept right now?
Of everything in one building?
Everything in one building? I just questioned, just being the devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Is there
No,
any
no.
downside to this
Yeah.
that we don't know about? I don't know. I mean, research.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what I don't know.
I want to say North Kansas City may
What
have
about
done
the two
that.
chiefs right here? You've both been quiet.
Yeah, I was gonna say he worked
I
in North
can't
Kansas City.
think of
I think they did all three together. I think you
Who
said,
did?
when you get into larger communities, you probably see it much less because you're building multiple
less
fire
what?
stations.
Was it Kansas City, Missouri?
North
North Kansas City, okay. And then, I believe Margaret was asking if the chiefs had any input on that as well, since they'd be.
They've both been quiet.
As long as you're on the opposite sides of the building, you're okay. So,
Yeah.
no.
I'll say from the experience that the public-private piece of it got convoluted. So we got down to this, and it may have stalled it. So if I have an opinion on it, it would be, let's focus on the public facilities, and then we can come in and add those other private factors when we know exactly what we're dealing with. So we were trying to do so much, so we kind of got lost in that. That's my perspective. The number two piece is when we designed it the way we did, using the people that we did, we got compacted to that north end of this block. Okay, and so then we decided, well, the best thing is to go up and share all of this space. It doesn't work completely like that. Now there could be shared spaces, training facility that's shared. We can manage it between us. That's what. But we can't share conference rooms, things like that, that may be sensitive to us or sensitive to them. Those things don't work. And so we try to take this great big lot, we packed this building, and we went up. And I know that design wise, but it didn't seem, I wasn't sold on it. I'm not speaking for the chief here, but I don't think we were really sold on. We were pushed way to the north and that sort of thing. What I recommend is we forget that. Let's start over. Let's see what other folks may be able to come with the design with a full outbuilding. I'm not saying that a front entrance where then you go to the police, you go to the fire, you go to admin. But if you really looked at the plan that has before, there was these hallways and there was this stuff. It was really, it didn't seem to have an open footprint, to have this kind of, we were getting back. That's my perception of what they presented. And it's not what I envisioned at the time. And I know it's not all about me, but in the sense of what we thought the department would look like with the fire department and how that would interact with the admin space as well. It got to be where we'll go here, we go there. It's just really convoluted.
I would actually concur with the chief on that part, right? Is there, no, I mean, and we had made that comment, but because we just got to that point, I'm not suggesting that we just take what they drew up and then put it out. Right. You're going to go through a completely new design process.
And part of it could be what's your recommended location on the property and how will you make it happen?
Right.
And Chief
I
Whittem, did you?
concur a lot with what was already discussed here. The one item that, we have to look at is space. When we look at space, and I'm doing the space on the house for what I need next door, I need 19,000 square feet. What I'm supposed to be doing right now, I need 19,000. I'm crammed into 9. We were facing almost the same thing where we weren't gaining a whole lot more space by moving on to it. And then we had some typical problems we're looking at is, oh, well, everybody can share this and Now you got a kitchen downstairs and you've got a training room over here, you've got that over here. And by standards that we have, we almost have to be horseshoe around apparatus. We have a 60-second shoot time. Now the town did, but we have to be out the door. Now, granted, you don't always get that luxury with it, but we were compacted to where they were trying to share police officers coming through and other city hall staff coming through one door and the backside by the fire station. There was 20 or 30 feet difference between firehouse stalls and side port stalls, doors and everything. But the other item is I've worked in a facility that was all three put together. And over the process, all three separated after it was done and went to three different facilities. And we ended up in the original building because it was one of the fire truck stalls. And what drove a lot of that was different needs from the two other agencies. Police department needed more secure storage for marijuana and weapons. And then, when the crime rate started popping back up, methamphetamine started running again, then all of a sudden they're like, well, we're out of room. And which room are we taking now? Which spot closet are we trying to convert to go to here? And the same with City Hall. As they added on more personnel at City Hall, and our city did utility building right there and ran all three utilities, tried to have department heads in there and everything else. And part of the problem was the building was built for that day to move in. And there was no forward progress of looking at what's that department going to be like 25, 30, or 40 years down the road, because you're building a building for a 50-year commitment. And like I said, there was a lot of discussion, between the web, ourselves, the whole process of what can we share, what can we not share. So have to be cognizant of a couple other items. So on the flip side, design build is another process we build stations with, and it worked better for the city overall. On a different project, they just built a new police department, a new separate fire department in two parts of the city, but they have a contract without that way. And what occurred was, the police chief had their contact over there, the fire chief, I had my contact over there. Throughout the whole process, we could have access to go in with everything. We still reported to the city manager and the contractor architect team that built the design and build. But it took a lot of that headache and hassle off of our city administrator at the time. We didn't have staff tied up to it. The city engineer sat there and was kind of like the city's liaison to the architect and team that they had and said, here you go. And we had turnaround times 18 to 24 months, in Wisconsin with quality buildings. But, that was another experience we had. It said that, this will work better when compared to watching the other two options that are there.
I would just wrap up is only to say, I don't think what we've done is lost. I think the comments are absolutely on point. Again, if you go through design, it's partially what is it we're going to ask a design build team to do is what I'm saying. Do we say, this is our piece of ground, right? These are the outcomes we want to achieve, right? We know we need new facilities for these three. What are your recommendations to do that? And part of that's going to then come back and when they present to whatever, we'll have a group that help make a selection, right? We want to tell them what kind of things we want them to come back to us and show it. Have they done a facility that's had all three? Have they done them where they're separate? Do they have experiences that says never put three together? It's the worst thing you've ever done. We've done three of them. They failed miserably, or these things work great, but this thing didn't work great. They should have the experience of these kind of projects, and we need to look to those experts, but we just need to give some direction. If I say to them, we're going to build on this site, that's different than I say, you can pick any site in the city you want to build on, come back to us.
So it seems like right now we have the site, we have the building needs.
Right. Right.
research that we've already paid
Right.
for, and
We know
that's
what's on our
ready.
property.
We're kind of talking about what method we want to use. So does that kind of get you what you need for tonight then?
I think so. I mean, I know the method. And again, I think that we have method. The site is here broadly, right? We know what our limitations, pros and cons are, right? I mean, hey, we have to stay in operation until we're in a new facility. And we don't have the option to go lease space somewhere for 6 months or 12 months or 2, right? I mean, there's no place to do that in. So we have to stay in some form of operation between now and whenever that other date is. I think we got enough of the foundation, and that's really what I was just trying to get to. Again, I think we got a lot of information that's valuable. We should share that with them, but it doesn't mean that that building that was conceptually designed was what we wanted. I mean, I saw several things, just like they said. I mean, you had the police vehicle going the opposite direction of the fire trucks in the same driveway. I was like, well, how are they going to drive this way and they're driving this way? That's just a disaster. I mean, I'm just looking at it going, that's a disaster. Somebody's going to hit somebody. So I think we're good. So,
Sounds good. Did you
other
have
than that-
anything else for your report, the city manager report?
beginning on the 15th, I am going to choose not to think about you all for about the next 2.5 weeks, just so you know.
Very good.
But I will be on vacation, probably with limited access by either choice or function. But Zach and the chiefs and, well, I'd say the public works director is going to be here, but that's a different discussion for the evening. But I have no doubt things will continue to operate smoothly as they always do. So
Okay.
that's all I have.
Very good. Zach, did you have anything for us tonight? Chief Matthews? Chief Whittem? Dusty?
Yeah, I guess I saw my note there, and I think everybody's known probably for a while now that my wife matched for residency in Lincoln, Nebraska. So, we will be moving up there, probably the 1st of June. I did sign on with a position here with an engineering firm that's based out of Kansas City, Lincoln, and Wichita. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with them in Kansas City on the 23rd. So my last day here will be the 20th. So we are advertising. But so far we haven't got a lot going there yet, but we're going to keep working on that. We're working on kind of the transition process and making a bulleted list of everything, every phone number, everything I can think of. For whoever keeps the peace when he's doing the public works position or whoever. Great, cool. So yeah, and I just want to thank everybody. Thanks for the opportunity, for the support, it's been great. I've mentioned to my wife or several people that I don't know that I could have fit better anywhere. It just felt like we fit here. Just the urban, the edge of the urban area was really cool, and I met a lot of great people in the town too. I mean, I've met just wonderful people that are texting me about my kid and everything. You know, it's just been great meeting people, talking to them on the side of the street. Things actually gave me a very good image of the urban environment that maybe I didn't know what to think yet. So I appreciate everything.
Thank you. Thank you for your time here.
That is a lot of effort to get out a big trash day.
Yeah.
He could still
Yeah.
come.
Yeah, you could have done that
He's
easy.
not relocating.
Oh.
Next day.
Ed,
Well, best of luck to you all. Thank you so much for your hard work here. Miss Dion, did you have anything? Councilman Adams?
You know, in listening to the discussion about with the two chiefs about the plan, it reminded me of Thomas Edison had like 1,000 failed experiments trying to design the light bulb, and they asked him, how's it feel to fail 1,000 times? He said, I didn't fail. I found 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb. And that's kind of what we did with that, with some of the design process. So it will not go to waste. So I appreciate it. Once again, I really have a lot of admiration, appreciation for the department heads and for Mike and his leadership on the finances. Every year when we put together a budget, I've done it for years with a great amount of confidence because of him and his team that put things together. You manage your hours well, you manage your expenses well. So it's a great comfort to have that as an asset for our city, to know that the money's managed well. So thank you very much to all of you for your part in that. So
Councilman Bishop?
How much is it gonna cost to keep you here, Dusty?
What's the doctor make?
That's the same answer I got. I said a doctor in residency or a doctor. Might be able to afford the doctor in residency.
Well, anyway, hey, thanks. You did a wonderful job. I mean, you really did. I was really impressed with you. Good luck.
A lot of things to go yet.
Yeah, but good luck.
Councilman Bishop?
I'm done. I am done.
Councilman Malat?
I'm mad at you for leaving this week. The Public Works Department, I remember when it started, actually, I went out with screwdrivers and pliers and fixed signs and things like that, before we even had anybody. We hired one person and he spent most of his time riveting the little blades on the sickle mower.
Yeah.
Because he'd tear them up kind of. But anyway, it's come a long ways. I expect it to come quite a bit further. The other thing is, I do appreciate the super constructive discussions that we have on this facility. And I put a lot of faith in what your expertises are and, what you need and everything. And would look forward to your guidance on what we need for that. And I just appreciate the way it's all handled by you guys, Mike and Jack and everyone. Bradley, good job on all of the stuff that's coming up. I'm pretty happy to see developments coming in after what happened at 150. So, anyway, hopefully that works this time.
Mr. Malat, was that a request to serve as interim public?
Well, that's
Works
what
director?
What they got going on in KC for a city administrator?
Yeah.
And I do,
You don't want that.
No.
no, I mean.
No, I know where you're going. I think
there's
Melinda,
ethics involved in that.
I think I got my answer. Thank you.
Which, well, no, I'm retired.
Everything pays better than this.
This used to be $25. When my dad was on the council, in the past it was $1.
Wow. Well, that's when loaf of bread was like half a cent.
38 cents. Oh, come on.
Did you have anything?
My Phyllis Freeman used to say, would you please cash your city council check? It was $23.08 after taxes. And I said, as soon as it adds up to $100, I'll cash it. She says, I gotta balance the budget. Cash your check. So that's where we were then compared to now. That's rambling.
You're good. Councilman Shriver?
Dusty, I saw you up on 110th cleaning up the sidewalks well after 6 o'clock, and hats off to you that, going above and beyond like that. We're gonna miss you. Like everybody said, we're happy, we're mad, but the best of luck to you, and never heard anything but good comments and good feedback about you. It'll be big shoes to fill. And I will say another great discussion about future development down here, building. I know as elected officials, we'll sit here and vote on something, but we have to know what is going to work, what is going to be the best feasible design place. It's not like putting a park pavilion someplace and no, it doesn't work, let's move it. So it's a long time coming, but with everybody's work together, hopefully we'll get this started. It's been talked about for a long time. And I will bring donuts. Dusty, you can bring your dogs. I'll watch them again.
Are you allowed?
And one more that it does, no, I don't need any feedback. Where are we with our signs? The mobile signs or the marquee sign
Oh,
or signs? I don't, if you can do some research, come back with something on that. Cost,
right.
where it can be.
Okay. I get, yeah.
I haven't brought it up in a long time, but I just think for purposes of advertising, there's so many things going on in this town all the time, and I don't know who's not getting the information. I know the hot shot, I know the website, but we probably have a lot of people not get on those sites that don't know of the harvesters events, just to name a few. So if you wouldn't mind, thank you.
Yes.
All right, just wanted to follow up on our last meeting. We had a discussion. It seemed like it was a concern of the whole council, that how many folks are delinquent in their trash bills. And we talked about revising that policy to where we're not letting them go so long or continuing services on the backs of the people who are paying their bills or on the city. And so I just wanted to follow up on that. Maybe the next meeting or so, bring us an updated policy for what we're doing in the future to keep those at bay. Quick reminder, the Edwardsville Mobile Pantry is coming up this Saturday. And so if anyone in here knows folks in need in the area, the last day to sign up is Wednesday, and that is on the city Facebook page. And Zach's been great to get that information out in the hot shot as well. Before our next meeting is the citywide cleanup, which is the 21st. So if anybody wants to mark their calendars for that, will be great. And then I noticed on the Facebook and walking in, the new little library in the front's restocked. So if folks in the community have kids that want to come check out books, that would be great. And then again, just to reiterate, Dusty, thank you so much for your service to our city. Congratulations on the next steps going forward for your family. That's all for tonight.
No, they went, one of them's already been adopted, two of them been adopted, but they're in college. They went, the four went to like the next day to Colorado. So,
Oh, really?
yeah, Adam was short.
Oh, wow.